Hello and welcome to Digital Photo Mentor live stream. It's been a couple of weeks since you've seen me or since I've been chatting with you. And I don't know why my camera is not focusing. Let me see if I can fix that. So I'm glad to have you here. I see that we have a few people in the chat. Of course, Rob is here. He's my husband and moderator. Deb's here from Alaska. Awesome. I have one of your images that you submitted as well. Yes, Stephanie, yay for new computers. I had literally a computer nightmare and clearly my camera is not focusing. So let me see if I can make it focus on something. Give me a second here. See if I can focus. Some image notes from a tutoring session that I did this afternoon. Well, I'm out of focus, so I'm just going to make myself smaller, and hopefully I won't look too out of focus. All right, let's see. Who else is there here? Hey, Ron, welcome back. Yes, after daylight savings time, and so it's great. Hopefully you've got your coffee and you're good to go. So I've got a few images already on the screen, including yours, Trish, that you sent. So if you missed that, yeah, I had some computer nightmares in terms of had to replace my entire logic board or motherboard. So luckily it was under warranty and I didn't have to pay anything. So I am up and running again. And yes, I'm trying to get my camera in focus, but for some reason, I don't know why I'm not in focus. So I'm going to switch over to Lightroom and we will get started. All right, let's see if I'm in focus now. I think I look a little more in focus, maybe. No. I don't know why I'm in focus. Well, I'm just going to stay small then or stay off the screen today. So I've got several images. As I mentioned, I've got Deb's and Trish's, and I've got a few that from a camera club that I did a few weeks ago that I didn't get through. So I'd like to finish up those for the camera club as well. So let me get started. And I know that Trish and a few of you are using a combination of things in terms of Lightroom and Luminar. So I'm going to use a combination of both today. Let's just jump in with Deb's image. Since you're here, Deb, was there anything specific that you wanted me to address with this one, or just generally how I would approach it? That's the way that I would. I'm gonna do so. But if there's something specific that you want me to look at or fix or address, put that in the chat. And yes, it's good to see you, Nancy. Rob, Nancy's one of the ones that's having trouble with our download of our new bokeh pack, which I'll show you guys a little bit later. So I'm going to start with this one in terms of how I'm going to approach it. And that's what Deb said she wants. Okay, perfect. So the first thing that I'm going to do in Lightroom is what I often do is change the camera profile. So I'm hoping you can see my little green cursor here. So follow my cursor. And that is in the upper top here under the basic panel. Now, I have not upgraded my Lightroom yet to the latest version because we have, you can see under my Adobe here, I do have an update available for Lightroom Classic. And if you could pop the link to Pete's class in the chat, Rob, we do have a masterclass on the new masking tools inside of Lightroom, which I haven't even used yet. And since I just got my computer back, I didn't want to mess with anything in Lightroom and update and then, you know, completely throw myself off. So I'm still using the older versions with the radial mask and the graduated filter. But if you want to learn more about the new masking tools that they just came out in the latest version of Lightroom, we do have a 2-day masterclass on that with Pete Van Den Eyne, who is a Photoshop Lightroom Adobe expert. So I'm going to learn how to use it right along with you guys. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the camera profile. So when I click the little 4 squares, you can see that there are some Adobe ones that come built in, and that's generally the one that it applies. So it usually applies camera standard, or you might see Adobe Color there. Okay, so if you shot a particular profile in camera, it's going to show that, and you can see here it's showing camera standard. And the camera that she used is a Nikon D750. Okay, now you can also see the other camera profiles. So I'm just going to hover over them, and you'll see the preview on the screen. So flat, you can see, takes out a lot of the contrast. Landscape adds a bit of contrast and usually enhances things like sky or blue, and greens like landscape. Portrait usually provides more red. Neutral is not bad in this case. So if we look at the difference between standard and neutral, there's a lot more detail in the dark areas and less contrast. Okay, vivid, I tend to stay away from for most profiles because it adds a lot of contrast and saturation, and then I end up dialing it back anyways. So I'm going to go with neutral on this one. And let's see, what else? Is there anything else? I did want to comment on your camera settings on this one, because you're using quite a long lens, 390 millimeter. I noticed that you've got a nice fast shutter speed, so that's really good. Good job on that. And I did zoom in, and he's sharp. We're looking at his feathers and stuff here. The only issue with this one is my question would be, what camera mode did you photograph this in? Because it's a bit underexposed. Okay, so I'm seeing that you use manual exposure. Okay, so the thing with manual exposure is when you're looking through the viewfinder, you need to set the little scale to 0, okay, for the most part, okay? But what you want to do is, once you take a picture, use the histogram to judge whether or not it's a good exposure, not the view of the image on the playback screen. Rob, if you could please share a link to the article on what happens if your snow is gray, or what to do if your snow is gray, and that talks about the histogram and how to use it not only when you're photographing, but I'm going to show you how to use it when we're editing. Okay, so when we look at the histogram, that's this graph up here in the upper right corner of Lightroom. It tells us the distribution of pixels from dark to light. Okay, so over on the left is black, over on the right, I'm doing this opposite because my camera's opposite, is white. Okay, and in the middle is medium gray. So when you set your camera meter, or when you're in any of the automatic modes, you're basically setting it to 0 or middle gray. Okay, now in this case, what this histogram is telling me is that you've got nothing that's white, nothing that's highlights or brighter areas, but not pure white. And then you've got some things starting at sort of almost middle gray to darker. So the swan, we know, should be white, right? So there should be something white in this picture. So this tells me this is underexposed, okay? Now, the first thing that happens when people see an underexposed image is they jump right to the exposure slider and they push it up. So look how far I have to go just to get that stretched out to make white, and look what happens to the rest of the image. Okay, so now the swan looks a bit whiter. We've got some highlights and up in the histogram area, but I've pushed the exposure up +1. Oops, can you guys see that? I don't know if you can see that. Let's see. So it shows +1.15 here. Okay, so what that means is I've increased the exposure over a full stop. Okay, so that means it was really underexposed, but there's a better way to do that, because the exposure slider is actually relative to the mid-tones of your image, not the bright highlights. Okay, so we want to increase the brights or the whites. So I'm going to show you a little trick here. If you've watched my videos before, I'm going to hold down the shift key, and then I'm going to double click on the word whites. And what happens is, I'm going to undo that because I want you to watch the histogram. Okay, so when I do this, watch what happens to the graph. Ready? I'm going to double click. So I'm shift, double click. And what it did was it shifted this white slider over to the right, increasing the white brightness until it touched the edge of the graph. Okay, so now you can see that this graph is basically more spread out. So it stretched it, but it stretched it only to the right, not to the left and the right. Okay. If I do the same thing with contrast and go this way, you see it's also stretching the graph, but it's stretching it both ways. Okay, so what I do is I set what's called the white point by doing this shift double click, and then the same thing on blacks. Okay, so just by doing those two quick little things, so well, three, including the camera profile, okay, we've gone from a dark image to that. Okay, so what that does is it makes sure that I have some white in my image. Now, if you want to check to make sure there's nothing clipping or going off the edge of the graph, hold the Option key down when you click whites. So I'm going to go further on purpose. Okay, so if I leave it there, that means that there's no detail in those areas that are showing up as white. Okay, so that means that if I leave it there, there's no detail in the swan, and you can see he's kind of blown out. Okay. So what I do is you can, if the double click trick doesn't get you close, you can check it by going to the right till you see some of these little notices and then just dragging until they go away. And it's back where it was with the double click, right? So it did a good job. With the blacks, right, I actually do want to clip a little bit. So I'm holding Option, Alt, Option again, and I want to go a little more to the left. So I do have a little bit of blacks clipping. The reason that I want to clip the blacks is because it makes the image richer, and any color that you have in your picture will actually be enhanced and more saturated when you add black, right? So again, before and after, we're just brightening our little swan up. The next thing I'm going to do is a bit of cropping. Okay, so his face is right in the middle of the picture. He does have space in front of him, okay? But in this case, I honestly would have liked to see more of his body and more of the reflection, but we don't have that. So I'm just going to stick, I'm going to make sure I lock the aspect ratio, and you can do that with the little lock here, or just hold the Shift key down when you slide your corner, right? And that will keep it the same proportions. So I'm going to go about here because that puts him a little more off center up to this upper section here, and a little bit less grass. I don't think we need to see all the stuff above his head, right? Because coming in a little closer really focuses more on his face. The other thing that bothers me, and this is where Rob says I see things that he doesn't see, is over here on this left side, there's this tiny little sliver of light area, okay? And what happens is when you're looking at an image, I'm going to do this one upside down with my upside down trick. When you're looking at an image, your eyes are drawn to four different things, okay? So if you've watched this before, you may have already seen me do this one, okay? So these are the four things that grab your attention when you're looking at an image, okay? So sharpness, color, contrast, and brightness. Now, the brightest thing in this picture right now is the swan, so your eye does go there, but there's a sliver of light right down the side here, and my eye wants to stay on the edge of the frame. Okay, so what I want to do is just crop it a little bit differently. So I'm going to go back into my crop tool. I'm just going to move it over a little bit so that the edge of the frame, and you can see that I've still got a tiny little bit there. So I'm going to move it over a little bit more. So I want the edge of the frame to have a dark edge as opposed to a light edge. Okay, and I can fix that a little bit with a graduated filter or radial filter as well, which is the next thing that I'm going to do. Okay, so I'm still using the old tools, remember? So I'm using the radial filter, and I'm going to use the Dodge Face preset and just drag it over his face. Okay, so see how that lightens up this part of the swan. So I want to lighten his face and these sort of dark reeds. I might even go a little farther. And then I'm going to do a second one, but I'm going to invert it, reset by double clicking the word effect, and this time I'm going to darken. So I'm going to darken the outside a little bit. Okay, so now I want to darken the edges of the image like so. Okay, so that makes sure that he has detail on his feathers over here. Maybe not quite that dark. Let's try about like that. Okay, so if I turn these filters on and off, you can see what that's doing. Okay, now the new tools, you can still use a radial mask. It's just done in a little bit different way because the tools are all combined now and you pop them up. So just curious, is anybody updated to the new Lightroom already and given the new masking tools a try? I would love to hear from you if you have, and if you're having trouble using them, because I'd love to know if there's any questions that you'd like to have answered, because I can actually send those to Pete and we can answer them at the end of the class, the masterclass. Okay, so let's take a look at our swan. Okay, so before, okay, his face is sort of lost in the reeds because they're both dark, right? And now I've brightened him up, and I'm going to actually revisit this graduated or this radial filter on his face. So I did some brightening, but I'm going to go back and add some texture and maybe even a tiny bit of clarity. Okay, so what that's doing is I'm just giving texture and clarity there and sharpness and not to the rest of the image, okay? So this is applying only where you see the red inside the circle. On the other one, it's applying outside the circle. I'm going to apply some clarity generally overall. I'm going to use one of my Lightroom presets. And we actually have all of our digital products on sale right now. So if you want to share a link to the fall sale, please, Rob. My Lightroom presets, our courses, the Pete's other masterclasses, if you missed those, and our brand new bokeh packs. Those are all on sale right now until November 21st. So send us, put a link to that if Lightroom is something that you are using. Actually, can you do the fall sale page instead of the shop page, Rob? Okay, so that's about all I would do with this guy here. If I wanted to minimize the contrast in the background here a little bit, we could work with that in terms of either another radial filter, or I could actually pull it into Luminar and do some destructure. I'm just going to do a quick graduated filter, and I'm going to lower the clarity and the texture and the sharpness. And now that's going to apply, as you can see, over his face too. Okay, so I want to do a range mask on this guy, and I'm just going to remove it from the bright areas. No, I might have to mask him. See, that's not going to work because it's going to remove it from the background as well. So I'm going to brush it out on my little swan here. Okay, if you choose auto mask, Lightroom will try and find the edges for you. Okay, so I'm just going to paint out this mask, and you can see that as I paint over him, it's removing that effect from the swan. Okay. So what's happening is I'm just defocusing that background a little bit. Okay. Lastly, I'm going to warm the picture up a little bit because I feel like he's a little bit blue. You can do that by choosing one of the presets, because this is a raw file. So all the presets from your camera for white balance will still be there. So we could try cloudy, for example. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I find that cloudy does a nice job, but I find that the magenta is a little bit high. So I usually turn that down to about 4 or 5 and get a nice color. The other thing you can do is use this little targeted adjustment tool here. Because you know the swan should be white, right? Notice that as I move my mouse around the swan, look at the little thumbnail on the upper left corner of Lightroom, okay? Because if I put it over the blue, it's going to do the opposite. Whatever my little eyedropper is hovering over, it's going to try and neutralize that color or make it opposite. So opposite of blue is yellow. Right? If I go up here in the swan, if he's really sort of blue in the shadow areas, he's going to get more warm, like so. Right? So I think that's a bit too warm. But this is a good way to get a good starting point, and you're going to get close, and then you can just tweak the sliders a little bit. Okay? If I want to darken the water, you can go down to the HSL panel, and there's another little targeted tool. So HSL stands for hue, saturation, and luminance, or lightness. So I'm going to grab this targeted tool. So whenever you see one of these things, it allows you to click on it, and then you get this little sort of up and down circular thing, right? And a little crosshairs. So wherever I click and hold, I'm going to click here on this blue and click and hold and then drag down. And watch what happens. Okay, so anything that's that same tint or that same color is going to be affected. So you can see the slider moving the blue. Okay, so I'm going to darken it a little bit, about like that. So all that does is helps him stand out a little bit more. All right. Okay. So Deb says that she's updated and you like the new masking. Awesome. Good to hear. Stephanie's looks like you've updated as well. The select sky and select objects. Yes, I'm going to be updating pretty much right after we finish today. I just didn't want to get myself in trouble before going live with the software that I hadn't used before. So let's move on to the next one. I hope that helps you a little bit, Deb, in terms of how you edited this picture. I'm curious to know if you did it any differently. Okay? Let me know in the chat. The next one I'm going to do is Trisha's because she's here as well. Now, I know that she works in Luminar, so I'm actually going to pop this one over to Luminar, but I'm going to do some basic edits here in Lightroom first. So again, camera profile. So this one was taken with a Fuji, and I'm going to choose the Provia, which I think it already was on. And this one, now you'll notice the histogram here is clipping on the opposite end. There's actually going off the chart. Okay, so if you want to see the clipping, just press J on the keyboard and you'll see red highlights wherever the whites are clipping and blue where the blacks are clipping. So I'll just like that. Okay, just give you an idea. Or if you do the shift double click thing, you'll notice that this time it lowered the whites, right? So I'm going to actually leave whites where they were. And I'm going to lower the overall exposure again, which is midtones. And instead, I'm going to bring the highlight slider down. So I'm doing Alt Option again and bringing the highlight slider down. Okay, so that's going to pick up a little more detail in the sky. And I might go a little warmer with this image as well because it's a little bit on the cool side. So let's warm it up. Again, a little too much of the magenta. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So we're getting somewhere, right? So we started with blown out sky, which is the issue that Trish said she was having. And that happens because when it's an overcast day like this, you pretty much are not going to capture a lot of detail in the sky. Even if you bracketed it, there's really not much there to grab, okay? So I'm pulling down some detail just so that we can bring it into Luminar and do a sky replacement, okay? I'm going to crop this one a little bit as well. And I'm going to bring it up from the bottom because there's a lot of sort of the main part of the subject again is right in the middle. Now you'll notice when I activate the cropping tool, you'll see the rule of thirds, the little tic-tac-toe board, okay? When you have your main subject right in the middle, it's the least dynamic or the least interesting, okay? So what I want to do is bring this up from the bottom because you've got almost a third of this image with blank field and a post, okay? So the further or the more foreground you have in front of your subject, the further away it feels like it is in the picture. Okay, so watch what happens when I just do this, right? Doesn't it feel closer now? Okay, now it's still in the middle, so ideally I would have loved to have more room on this side because it's kind of blowing that way, and it's a really interesting subject for sure, right? It must be in a very windy place. I might take a little bit off this side. I'm undecided yet, but let's see how that goes. Okay, so now we're sort of right smack in the middle again. Like I said, I'd rather have some more room over here, but we don't have that, right? So that's about all I'm going to do in here. I might add a tiny edge vignette, but other than that, I don't want to go too far. We can do a graduated filter to do the sky. And again, if you're using the new selection tool, it will select the sky for you, which is brilliant. Okay, so I'm just going to take it off of there with the luminosity mask, like so. Okay, so all I'm doing is darkening that sky just to bring out a little more detail. And the other reason that I'm doing that is because when I darken the sky, I'm just going to show you a before and after here on these edges. Okay, so the original image, you see that there's not a lot of detail on these branches and they're sort of disappearing into the background. By bringing down the highlights, I'm picking up those branches. So when we take it into Luminar, and again, you can do these exact same things in Luminar, okay? You'll be able to it'll be able to cut that out a little better. Okay. Trish says it's a place called Slope Point. Interesting. So is it super windy there? It looks like it's really super windy. It's interesting how it's just a cluster of looks like cedar trees or something in the middle of a field. Interesting spot. If that's near you, definitely worth exploring some more, I think. Okay, so now I'm going to right click and edit this in Luminar AI. If you had any questions about the new Luminar Neo that has been introduced and is coming, they're saying by end of the year or Christmas time, roughly, I'm actually going to be doing a video in the next day or two just to go over what I know about Luminar Neo and whether or not I think I would recommend it for you. So basically I'll go through who it's for, who I think it's not for, right? So watch for that coming on the YouTube channel as well later this week. Okay, so now we've got Trish's image in Luminar. So we could play with some templates. Let's just see if we get anything interesting from here. I know that there's one that I have saved in my favorites. It's the Toscana one. And it does a sky replacement. So I might actually just start with this one. Let's see what kind of a job it does, right? And it does the sky replacement, and there's a few tweaks, and obviously this sky doesn't match, right? But it's kind of a quick, okay, I can get there and then make some edits after the fact, right? So I definitely want to change the sky. So we're going to do that first. And I know that this mood here is probably adding a lot of pink. Okay, so I did that to match the sky. So I'm going to turn the mood off. And we're going to pick a new sky. Now, the thing with picking skies is you have to sort of be careful of picking a sky that's going to match, right? So I'm going to pick one of these clear skies. And I believe these are free on the Luminar website. Because with this original image, when we look at the original, okay, the sky itself is kind of nondescript, and so is the landscape. Like the lighting is very soft and even, so we don't want to have a really contrasty, sunsetty sky because it's not going to make sense with the rest of the lighting in this image, right? That one's not bad. Let's see if we can choose one that's a little bit different color. Okay, so that's not bad. Now what I'm going to do here is I can darken it. Okay, so I can darken the sky down. I can make it cooler or more blue or warm it up. Okay, let's go a little cooler. And there's no reflection, so we don't have to worry about that. But let's see about scene relighting. Okay, so the scene relighting in the Sky AI is brilliant because what it does is it tries to match the color of the rest of the image with the sky. And we're going to do a little better blending on that as well. All right, let's check the mask here. Sky orientation is the placement. So I want to see where it's placed the horizon. Okay, so it's not done too bad a job. I'm just going to spread it out a little bit and then rotate it because it's missing this part here. There we go. All right, so that looks like a better placement. So there's no sort of gaps at the bottom there. It's doing something weird here, but we'll come back to that. It's probably something in my template. So this is looking better, right? Now with a template, whenever you apply something, if you have a mask, Okay, so Sky AI works as well on here, just to darken the replaced sky. Anytime you have a mask on something, like for example, I'm looking for one that might have a mask. I bet you I dodged and burned or did something like that. Interesting. There's some weird stuff going on here, and I can't figure out what's causing that. So I would have thought it was dodge and burn, but it doesn't look like it. But I'm going to do a reset on the dodge and burn anyways. Yeah, it looks like it's lightening. Let's turn down enhance. Okay, if you're not sure what's happening, right, just go through each thing and turn it on and off, right? Because when you've applied a template, it's doing things in the background, but you can check each tool. Okay, so maybe I want to dial this one down a little bit, and I would probably mask this one so that it is only on the trees as well. Okay, because I don't want to sharpen or add structure to the sky, so I'm just gonna give it to the trees right here like that. Okay, now I can copy that mask as well. Let's check what else we got going on. Okay, color is definitely picking up the green. That's nice. Let's do something similar here. So I'm going to paste that same mask so that I've got the details only applying to the tree as well. Right? Yeah, I don't know why it's doing this weird thing here. Let's try mood now. Let's reset this guy. Okay, so Toscana mood obviously is not fitting because it's very pink. So mood is what's called a LUT, and there's some really great color tonings available in here. I turn my saturation of it up so that when I'm choosing, well, that one looks kind of nice. When I'm choosing, I can see it really well. Okay, so that kind of does a nice thing. And then I just dial it down a little bit. So I can see what's happening here. I know what's happening. No, I thought maybe I had another layer mask up here somewhere. I'm obviously painted in somewhere and I cannot find it. I've puzzled myself. Let's try landscape. We're going to do a little foliage enhancer. The thing with the foliage enhancer I find is that it goes way too fluorescent green. So I always change the hue and then dial that way back. So be very cautious with this one, right? Probably even more so. So I don't want to make neon looking grass or make it look like it doesn't fit, right? We could also do an augmented sky here and add some birds, or we could add a cloud, for example, right? So we could add the birds or we could add the clouds. Now the new Luminar Neo is going to have layers, so you can actually add multiple objects like this. Okay, so this is kind of leaning everything this way. If we put this cloud over here, like this, it kind of balances the image a little bit, right? We can also size it. We want to make it a little smaller, like so. And then I'm going to add a vignette. So lower the darkness, lower the feather to 0, and then it allows me to see the shape of the vignette and place it exactly where I want it. So I want it more over this bush here, like so. And then just put the feather back and soften it a bit. I'm not crazy about that color. It's a little bit oversaturated in the greens. So I just want to make sure I take care of that. Check the yellows and the greens. Yeah, so yellow's been saturated. Let's bring that guy down a little bit. So let's take a look at a before and after. Okay, so that's what we brought from Lightroom, and that's what we've got now. I'm going to keep working with this one to try and figure out why I've got this weird light thing happening here. For the life of me, I cannot see what is doing it. Okay, anything that you've applied will have a little dot beside it, and I don't see anything that is doing that. So it's puzzling me. Let's try turning this one off. No, that's not it. So I'm just going to turn each of them off and on and see what happens. No, that's not it either. Well, I am stumped, I have to say. Yeah, none of these are on. Super contrast is another one that I actually use a lot, especially if you want to add a little bit of punch, especially to a certain area of the image. Okay, so midtones, what I do is I bring the contrast amount up again quite high. If you drag the bottom one, it will show you whether it's going to lighten the midtones, which is left, or darken them on the right. So it's kind of opposite of your sliders, like that apply to your histogram. It's opposite, right? So light is to the left. So I like brightening up these midtones a little bit. And if you want to lower highlights, if you've got a problem with highlights, or maybe we want a bit more punch in the highlights, okay, let's see what that overall filter is doing. Turn it off. Turn it on. Okay, so see, it's just adding a little bit of overall punch. What do you think, Trish? Now we could play around with different skies, but again, you want to make sure that the sky that you choose, let's see if there's anything in our sky pack, which is also on sale. You want one that isn't going to look like it doesn't fit. So I've got some that are cloudy. Let's take a look at that. Nope, not cloudy enough. So see how that doesn't really fit? That one doesn't really fit either. We could go interesting and make it into a night picture. Yeah, there's definitely something masking on there. For the life of me, I can't figure out what is doing that. That is a puzzle, I have to say. That is a puzzle. Interesting. Well, I am stumped on that one. So you can do things like this where you add a night sky and turn it into something that's quite different, right? But like I said, you want to make sure that your sky matches. And I don't think I have one in my set that is going to work as well as the one that was the clear skies. So you really have to choose carefully, right? Let's try one of these. These will be my last. Okay, so it kind of doesn't really fit. I wonder if you've got something on the image that you applied, Trish, that is doing that little dodge and burn trick. So I'm just going back in my history here. It should take me back. There we go. Okay, so history is a little clock on the side. Yeah, very strange. It's definitely something in there that's like burning or dodging or something. Huh. Something cloning. No. Something erasing. No. Wow. I'm stumped. I'm going to keep playing with this one. All right. So Trish says she did try a few skies, struggled to find a good fit. Yeah, the simple one here, because you want something that's not blown out white. You just want to make it less boring, right? So definitely too dramatic sky would take away from the tree, and it doesn't match the lighting, right? You went back to the imported file. Yeah, you did send me the raw file for sure. And there was some things that were applied, but I reset it. Okay, so it should just take us back into Lightroom. But what's happening is, so yeah, there's our edited version from Luminar. And it definitely is not there. So it's probably something that I did with that template so that I saved. So that's something on my end. I'm going to play with that a little bit more. But I think if you work on it in terms of looking for a sky that is a bit more simple, yeah. I think, yeah, Holly says it's something I did in Lightroom. I don't think so. I think it's something I did in Luminar, right? If I just go and grab it again, let's do a test here. And we're going to take it to Luminar again. If I don't apply a preset or a template, it should just give me exactly this, because I do think it's something that's applying in that particular template that somehow I saved it masked and it's not showing up. Right. So while that's happening, let's see, do we have any other questions that I missed, Rob? I think I got everybody's points here. Nancy, try the download again. There was one other lady that was having trouble as well. I'll send you her information, Rob. Okay, so here's the file again. Yeah, so if I just go in here and change the sky, so I'm not using a template, let's just do the clear skies. I think that was the one I used. Definitely something. Oh, no, it is showing up there. Maybe it's the sky. Oh, it's showing up from there. It's that sky, I think. Isn't that interesting? Let's try a darker one. Yeah, there it is. Isn't that bizarre? Definitely something that's going on here, I think. Huh. Interesting. No, so it's not part of the preset. Yes, I do. Wow, we got something to stump me. So I hope you're happy with that, Trish. Play around a little bit more. Like I said, if you go, if you don't have our Sky Pack, you could get that as part of the fall sale as well. They're on half price, so $14.50 US. And also, like I said, there are some additional ones available on the Skylum Marketplace. And I know that I think some of them are made by Skylum themselves, and they're available for free. Also, if you are a Luminar X member, you'll regularly get things that are downloadable included with your monthly membership. So what that means is you get some what they call assets. Okay, so you'll get an email once a month with a few free things included. Right? Okay, let's move on to something different. So these are the ones from the Camera Club a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted to work on this one of Sue's because I thought it was a really cool image of a flower. So she's done a backlight job here, and if we look at the histogram, okay, you see there's lots of white areas here, okay, and that's mostly representative because there's a white background, okay. So there's nothing wrong with this image in terms of exposure, okay. It's just representing what we actually see in the image, okay. I could darken the whole thing a little bit, okay, and you can see that that starts to affect the flower, but I like the sort of translucentness of this flower, and I'm actually going to make sure with my white slider that I want to actually have a little bit of clipping. So if we take this white slider higher, or we do the shift click, actually I want to take it higher than that, we're going to make sure that everything in that background is white, right? So if we can actually really take it farther. Now this is going to print pure white with no detail, right? If that's what you want. So I'm going to bring it up a little bit higher, and then you see how exposure really affects the midtones, which is that flower, right? Now, just by doing that, increase the saturation a little bit, and I haven't done anything with the blacks yet, so we're going to check the blacks. Right, so if we go all the way there, now we've got much deeper blacks. And let's just see about our camera profile. Let's see, clear, deep, light. Not sure what camera she's using here. Sony. Okay, so these are Sony profiles. So clear, deep, light. Ooh, that brightens up the flower nicely. Landscape, neutral. Neutral is interesting because it brings out sort of more veins in the flower. Portrait, vivid. Like I said, I sort of avoid vivid. I like this neutral one because what that allows me to do is to work with that. I'm not going to dial it down as much, and I'm going to give overall the picture a bit of clarity and texture. Okay, now I normally wouldn't go really high with these things overall, but because the background is pure white, you can get away with it. Okay, now notice that as I do texture, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. As I do texture, watch what happens to the flower. Okay, it pulls out all the details of those veins in the petals. Okay, as I do clarity, you get sort of clarity is an edge contrast. So the difference between clarity and contrast is that contrast is overall and clarity is only in the edges of things. We have an article on that, Rob. If you could please share clarity versus contrast article for them. Linton feels better that I'm stumped. Thanks, Linton. I don't. But you know what? Hey, I'm just human. Just human, and I screw up stuff too. In fact, I screw up stuff all the time. Okay, so now I'm going to just warm it up a little bit. Okay, let's try. Cloudy might be too warm, so I want to keep it pink. Right. So we've got some richer colors, right? And if I want to darken the leaves of the flower of the plant here, remember we're going to go to HSL. So now I can darken the leaves without darkening the flower. And I could also lighten the flower back up again. Okay? Or I could even shift the hue, for example. Okay, so if we want a different color, we want more purple, we want more yellow, or I want to shift the hue on the leaves. Let's say I want it more yellow. Okay, see how it's more blue and more yellow. Let's just go a little bit like so. In terms of cropping for this image, the one thing that bothers me is that this leaf is touching the edge, right? I kind of want to either cut it off or have more of it there, okay? And the same thing over here. I feel like I want more space over here. Now we actually could do that in Photoshop and extend the background, right? I'm not going to get into too complicated editing with that, but I'm going to crop in a little bit because I want to see what happens if I just get rid of that edge of the leaf and put the stem right on the corner, okay? Okay, now I'm looking at these little tiny white bits that got captured here again. So details. So I'm going to come in a tiny bit more, just like that. Okay. I can also play with, do I want to tilt things? Okay, so that makes the flower look like it's looking up more versus looking down more. Okay, so we could play with the angle of the flower as well. Right? So now it seems more sad. Let's stay with the original. I like it coming out of the corner here, so your eye follows the stem right to the flower, right? What else would I do to this image? There's a few things you could do. I could actually do a light edge vignette to put sort of the faded out bit on the corners. And that works really well. I'm just doing that with a preset of my vignettes. Again, this is my Lightroom presets. You can see if I turn it all the way up again, you can see the pure white edge over here. If I go the opposite way, you can see dark, right? So when I go over to the white side, so left is dark vignette, right is actually white. So you could see that this is pure white over here because you don't even see it. What it's doing is it's making white on that side. So I could make this a little rounder. The only disadvantage of doing this in Lightroom, again, is you don't have the ability to place the vignette, right? So I'm actually going to leave this one the way it is. And let's take it over to Luminar. Because what I want to do in Luminar is I often will add like effects, okay? So not just background changing or things like that, but like a glow or the color thing, like the mood, the LUTs. So it's called the lookup table or a LUT. In this case, I might want to add some structure to the flower or details to the flower in terms of there's more control in Luminar as compared to Lightroom when you're doing sharpness and detail, right? So clarity is just everything, whereas structure and then the details panel in Luminar allows you to do small, medium, or large details. Okay, so there's our flower. Again, I could go and try some presets. I know I don't want black and white, so I'm not going to do that one. Okay, that's added some odd things there. Hey, that's shifted the color. That's kind of interesting. And we've definitely got some stuff going on in the background because I've pushed it a little bit far on that side. So I think I'm literally just going to leave it the way it is. I'm going to go back to start from the original, and I'm just going to play around with some of the tools that I know that I like. Right now, the vignette. If we want to do the white vignette, we can do that in Luminar. And I can bring it in, make it smaller, because now I have the ability to place it over here. Okay, so I can vignette over on that side and have it sort of fade out. Okay. Could even make it smaller. Okay, so just adding a little bit of softness on the edge. And then let's play with some details, right? So again, medium details. I'm going to zoom in just a bit here so that you can see what it does, right? So medium details will apply to things which are medium size in the picture, right? If I do small details, you'll start to pick up a lot more of, every little tiny hair and bristle and effect, right? You want to avoid small details on people, right? And then large details, I often actually take large details to the left and blur it a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to sharpen this guy a little bit. I'm going to add some medium details and just a little bit of small details. Okay, so you can see how that's really picking up, especially in this petal, okay, the details. Let's see. The next one I might want to add, there's a couple here that come to my mind. I might want to try dramatic. Okay, so dramatic is really interesting in that it sort of makes this faded out grunge look. Now you do control the amount of saturation that you want to have, right? And the amount of local contrast. So you can make something that's really interesting, right? It starts to become, almost like a line drawing, right? Something kind of cool like that. Or you can keep the amount a little more subtle. Okay, so it's kind of just really bringing out the texture of the flower. So it's up to you to decide, what's more important to you, the texture or the color of this flower? And you can keep it more subtle as well. The other one that I thought about adding is going to be mood. Okay, so again, I'm going to turn it up to over 50% amount. And then I'm just going to look through these LUTs and these colors and see as I drag my mouse over what looks good on this flower. Oh, that's kind of interesting. It's very sort of soft and glowy. Pink background. And just see if something grabs my attention, right? That's kind of very, very soft and pale. Ooh, that's kind of nice too. So I'm just trying to make note of these names in my mind as I'm going through here. Is there anything that grabs you? Tell me if you see something that's stands out. Sometimes these cross-processing ones are interesting. There's an Auckland one for Trish. Yeah, I like some of the ones up at the top first. Let's go with one of these. Okay, so Santa Barbara. And then you can see what it's doing is it's really sort of increasing the contrast and bringing that color up. Okay. I'm also going to add Mystical. This is one of my favorite ones because it makes this sort of beautiful glow. And I want to make sure that shadows are protected. Actually, it's glowing too much around the white, so I'm going to try one of the glow filters instead. One of my favorites is the Orton effect. So if you've used previous versions of Luminar and you're looking for Orton, it's under glow. So when I turn this on, I find that it tends to brighten and add too much contrast. So I usually turn it down. Right? Let's see what that's doing. Okay, so it gives it a nice glow. So we've added lots of sharpness and texture, and then literally we're going backwards and adding some softness with one of these filters. So that's what it's doing in terms of Luminar, just adding like what I call a little bit of style. Okay. And if I want less color, I can go back to dramatic and play around with that a bit more. You could also go the other way and go super saturated with this one, or even black and white. Right? Very pretty image that Sue from the camera club that we worked with, Harbor City Camera Club, a couple of weeks ago. Okay. Let's take a comparison here. Okay, so the Luminar one is on the left and the Lightroom one is on the right. It's not a huge lot of difference, but it just added a little bit of softness to it overall. Okay. And if we want to look at Trish's compared side by side, same kind of idea. Okay. All right, let's do a person. This is another person from the camera club from a few weeks ago. And this was taken with a Samsung camera, which I'm not familiar with. I do believe it's more of compact camera, so I'm not super familiar with that. And we're going to take a look at the profile. Okay. Now it doesn't have any camera matching. Okay, so see that how it doesn't have camera matching, right? So I can look at the Adobe ones and see if there's anything better. Okay, so portrait, standard. I'm going to go with the portrait one just to see if we can get some better colors. I'm going to do the shift double click on the whites again, shift double click on the blacks. And in this case, I am going to increase the exposure because the midtones are overall, the whole image is dark, right? Now I'm going to do my Alt Option trick to see if the highlights are clipping. And I'm also going to crop this image. So if you're going to crop, do that before you do any other major adjustments, because you may end up cropping some of the bits out that you try and adjust. Okay? So I want to get rid of some of this furniture and stuff here and focus more on her and the dog, like so. Okay, so now once I do that, I get rid of the clipping on the carpet. Okay, so the challenge here is that she's quite dark. The wall looks crooked, okay? So we can also straighten that. And there's a few different ways to straighten an image, right? We can use the crop tool and just click auto, okay? And it did a pretty good job straightening, right? Or you can use this ruler and draw a line down something that you know is either vertical or horizontal, like that, and it will straighten based on that line. Be careful if you're doing verticals that they're not on the edge of the picture, because if you shot with a wide angle lens, you're going to have some distortion. Okay, so be careful of that. The other way to do it is down here under transform, and you just click level. Okay, so now it's done its job looking for vertical and horizontal lines to make sure that they are straight. Okay, so now she's straightened out. Let's give her a little more headspace now. Okay. And we need to lighten up this lady's face. So I could lighten the overall picture more, or we could do the radial filter, right? Or we could go into Luminar and use the portrait editing. Okay, so I would probably do that for this one. So I'm just using a radial filter to lighten her face, and that's just the Dodge Face preset. And then I'm going to duplicate it. So I've right-clicked, duplicate, and then I'm going to put it on the puppy's face. Okay, I think I want to lighten her even more. So be careful about lightening shadows too much. In this case, her nose is brighter than her face, so I do want to make sure that I lower the highlights a bit because I don't want her nose to get brighter. And let's check the shadows. That looks better. Okay, so she's getting there. Okay, dark and crooked, brighten her up. How's the color? Let's see if we can try auto white balance. Okay, she warmed up a little bit. So I'm going to give her just a little bit more warmth, but not too much. And now I want to take note of this color on her face. Okay, so notice how red her nose is. We can actually tone that down again in this HSL panel. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways. We can take saturation, use the targeted tool, and then just click on that color. So as I drag down, okay, so see how it's making red less saturated, but it also pulled magenta, okay? So I don't want to go quite that far. I'm going to go a tiny bit with it, okay, a little bit. And I'm also going to lighten because you'll notice that the color itself is a little darker. Okay, so if I lighten it, and then I'm going to play with the hue because it's red. And if I push the hue up, it gets more orange. Down, it gets more red. Okay, so I'm going to go a little to the orange side. Just a little bit. Okay, and when I turn this on and off, you'll see what the HSL panel is doing. Okay, so it does affect all the colors that are similar inside the image, but look what that's doing for the redness on her nose. Okay, so it's taken away the redness without getting rid of a lot of other stuff. Right, I'm gonna take that down a little bit more. Go. Now I can also brighten her face because most skin color or most skin tones contain a fair bit of orange. See that? So if I bring orange up in brightness or luminance, she's going to brighten as well. I'm going to take the reds even higher. There we go. Now we're getting somewhere. Now look at the nose is really evened out. Okay. I'm going to saturate orange a little bit more. Right, so this is kind of a standard thing I do with skin tones is I will actually brighten the yellow and the orange and the red a little bit and increase the saturation of those three a little bit. And in this case, we've made some different adjustments because of the color on the face. Okay, so see the difference? And I haven't had to use an adjustment brush or do anything like that. Now, the neat thing about the HSL panel in Luminar is that you can mask it, okay? So if there was other things in the room that's being affected, okay, so you can see that it's also affecting the floor, we can't mask that out in Lightroom, okay? If you're using Luminar, you can. Linton wanted to know, no, I don't know if this was about this image, Linton? You want to do similar tones and color grading, or was this about the last image that I did with the flower? Let me know which one you mean. All right. I'm going to add a little edge vignette. And then we're just going to brighten them up even a little bit more. There we go. Right. This image has a fair bit of noise as well because it's a smaller sensor camera shot at ISO 800. Okay, so if we zoom in, I don't know if you can see that. Let me see if I can zoom in here a bit more. Okay, so can you see there's a fair bit of noise, right? So I might go in here and just do some noise reduction. Again, I have a couple of presets that I have set for in my Lightroom preset package. So I've clicked on that, so low noise reduction and low sharpening. Okay, when you are using the sharpening, right, sliders in Lightroom, what will happen is you could increase the noise reduction, which makes blur. Okay, so it literally blurs your image. See what that's doing? Okay, so it's trying to get rid of the noise by blurring. But then if you go, okay, well, I'm going to sharpen it to counter, you're sharpening the noise again. Okay, so it's kind of a losing battle. So what I do is I'll usually keep the noise reduction somewhere in the middle. And when you pull your sharpening up, you want to use this masking slider. Right? Let me show you what it does. So when you hit the Alt Option key and masking, anything that shows white is being sharpened or being applied this filter. So right now the entire image is being sharpened. As I drag the masking tool up, now you can see that just the outlines of things are being sharpened, right? And what that does is it keeps that noise from being sharpened at the same time, right? And I've gone too far on the sharpening. But you can see it's a dance between, there's a bit of color noise in there as well, and removing the noise, but still keeping the image sharp, okay? If you want to share a review I did of or how to do remove noise in an image, Rob, there is a video that I did on that where I compared Lightroom, Luminar, and Topaz denoise, and hands down Topaz does win. So if you have a camera that tends to use or produces a lot of noise, then that might be something that you want to take a look at, right? The one thing that I did find, I did review on One Photo Raw, is their denoise function worked really, really well. And I do think you can purchase that one as well, separately. Okay, so Linton says this image, okay, color grading. No, not really. So color grading is different because it affects the highlights, the shadows, and the midtones. So if I wanted to, for example, let me just turn off the HSL. So if I wanted to affect this color on her nose, its midtones, I would have to go green to get rid of the red. Okay, but it affects the entire image, right? So you can see that everything is now green, right? So it's not as targeted. It applies to the entire image, right? I hope that helps. So color grading is more duotone or tritone. Okay, so for example, if you're going to do a black and white of this image, which we can do, okay, then you want to go into color grading because that's where, let's reset that guy. So that's where you can do things like, make a brown tone, like sepia, or I can make the highlights blue. So this is what's called a duotone, right? So I've got a different color in the highlights, right? This is more sepia, pure regular sepia. I can shift this to blue. Okay, so that's a duotone. And it used to be called split tone because there was two, and then they changed it to color grading because now you can introduce a third color in the midtones, for example. Okay, so now I've got magenta midtones, yellow highlights, blue shadows, right? But it does affect the entire image. Good question. Good question, Linton. Honestly, the color grading is not something I use a lot in Lightroom for color correction. I use that one more for on black and white images. However, I might use that one. Let me see if I have an example. If I had an indoor if I have an indoor shot where, let's say, the shadows are really blue or something. I can't find one. Let's just use Holly's image, for example. Okay, so let's say this one here, this one is really bluish green in the shadows. So I could actually use that to just warm up the shadows a little bit like this, right? So I'm warming up the shadows, and then I'm warming up the midtones, right? Without affecting the highlights. Okay, so in that case, I am using color grading to color correct. Okay, does that help? All right, where did we go? So that's about all I would do for this lady. There's not really a lot else I can do. We could do some things like a radial filter over here to minimize this carpet, right? So I'm just getting rid of the highlight there. We could do the same to sort of get rid of the highlights in the middle here. So just to tone things down. So I use radial filters a lot for tone control, right? Like so. I might remove the texture and the clarity. Let's darken that whole area. So I'm doing that just because those are areas that are grabbing attention away from her, right? Doing this background wall is going to be trickier, but I love to try it actually with the new tools in terms of selecting the subject and seeing if it cuts her out well. Okay. All right, let's see. We've got another flower image, but I want to do, let's see. Let's do a landscape. Okay, so this is from Lee. This was one of the Camera Club members from a couple weeks ago on the Harbor City Camera Club. And I remember briefly discussing this one in terms of they wanted to bring out the loneliness feeling of the beach, I believe. Okay, so this one is Fuji file, another Fuji shooter. And they are using the Vivid profile. So again, I'm not super fan of Vivid, and I'll show you why. Because I'm going to do my double click trick on both of these here. And you can see that now it's evenly stretched out on the histogram. There's really nothing wrong with this histogram, but it looks a little bright because everything is to the right of medium gray. So that's where the exposure slider is going to come in handy, and I'm going to lower that overall. Right? I'm going to adjust the white balance again to, let's try daylight. That's pretty green. Let's try auto. Let's see what it does. So sometimes I'll use auto just to see what it gives me as a starting point. That's a little on the yellow side, but it's actually not too bad. So we'll go with that. See how blue that was to start? Let's bring it down a little. Okay, now I'm going to go back and double check my blacks. Okay, so I definitely want to go the other way. And let's make sure we have some good whites. Okay, so now look at what's happening. We've got some nice contrast because I've done the blacks and the whites, adjusted the white balance. Now I'm going to go back here and see if Vivid or one of the others is actually better. My favorite is Astia in terms of Fuji profiles. I use that one probably the most for my own files, right? The challenge with this image is that there's a lot going on, right? If we look at it using my upside down trick, where does your eye go here, right? So tell me in the chat, when you're looking at this image of all the logs and the driftwood on the beach, where does your eye go, okay? The horizon is right, sort of almost in the middle. There's the big logs, which are now on the upper left, kind of going into the picture, right? You see the horizon in the middle, almost the middle. Then there's the big pine tree, which is now on the lower right, right? Where does your eye go? What does your eye drawn to in this picture? Anybody? Tell me what you see first. Sky and the top of the stump. Yes, I would have to agree with that. Anybody see something different? Stump. Yeah. Okay. So why is that? Why is that, guys? So of those four things that I mentioned earlier that grab your attention, right? It's one of those things. Okay. So when you look at your image, what's grabbing the attention here? It's the sharpness of the stump, the brightness of the stump, and it has contrast. Right. So now, is the stump the subject? I have no idea, right? It's not my image. I don't know what they intended, right? but it's definitely prominent in the scene, right? The other thing to think about when you're looking at an image like this is your eye reads from left to right, top to bottom, okay? If you are an English reader or a language that reads that way, okay? Now, if you are reading Arabic or Asian languages, they may read right to left, top to bottom, or different columns, right? So in most Western society, we read top to bottom, left to right. So when we look at this image, you read an image the same way. Okay, so top left, you come into the image from these big trees. You kind of land on this stump and you stay there for a while. And then as you sort of meander this way, the horizon and these logs take your eye out of the image. Okay, you're zipped right out of the image. So if you want the eye to stay in and be stuck on this log, okay, I might actually do something like this. Boom. Okay, so what I did was I went to photo, flip horizontal. Right, now what that did is it flipped the image around. Now where does your eye go? Okay, so your eye comes in on the left, which is now these logs, and it leads you to the stump. Okay, so instead of the other way around. Okay, so you're led to the subject if that's where we want to look. Okay, Kevin wants to know if I can edit in Luminar. I did a couple earlier in Luminar, Kevin, but yes, I can certainly pull this one in from here. Okay, so I've done some basic edits. We just did some color correction, and I definitely, you guys agree with the flipping, right? So now the eye is being drawn in towards that stump, and I feel like it's still missing something. Like I want to see a person sitting on the stump, or a squirrel, or a seagull, or something to keep the attention there, right? Because I'm not sure if the stump itself is interesting enough to keep your attention, okay? So let me lower the highlights a little bit here, and just to pick up that sky, and we're going to take this image over to Luminar, okay, for Kevin. Right, so I'm going to edit in. Now, I would normally, again, I'm editing a copy. If I'm working with Luminar as a main program, you would have the raw file open, okay? So Ron agrees, works better for leading the eye. Again, it really depends on, your the society and who you're showing your images to. So for us who are English speaking Western society, this is the direction that we read, including images. Okay, so have you ever heard that said before, that you read images? Okay, think about that. I am not going to apply a template here because I want to just work through some of the tools that I would use on this image. Okay, the very first one at the top of the Essentials panel, the Enhance AI, is where I would generally start. Okay, and what you want to do is take the sliders to extremes. Okay, like look what happens when I do that. Right, it's giving me a really nice punch because the image is almost kind of a little flat. So let's take that up fairly high. And then if we take up the sky enhancer, it's almost like applying a polarizing filter. Okay, be careful of going too high, because what's happening is I'm starting to get a halo or outline, and the blues are gone a little bit too unrealistic for me. So I'm gonna keep this one down to somewhere in the middle. Right, I'm gonna add an edge vignette. Right, and I do the vignette early on because I want to see sort of where I'm going to be drawing the eye into. Right, now if you missed the earlier part, I take the amount down really far, the feather down to 0, so that I can see this to shape the size and the roundness, and then place it where I want it. Okay, so if indeed this stump is where I want people to look, I want the vignette to be centered around there. Right, so then I just bring my feather up and make sure I soften that. Okay, so you don't want to do a vignette that looks like that. Okay, you don't want to be able to see the edge of the vignette. Right, you need it to be soft so that without me telling you it's there, you shouldn't be able to see the difference. Okay, so vignette off, vignette on. So all it's doing is subtly drawing the eye in more to that center part or the stump. Okay, good to see you, Nancy. Linton wants to know, What if I crop the sky? Well, see, and that's exactly where I was going to go next, because are um, if we are saying that the composition here is about the logs, right? The horizon is almost at that 2/3 point. Well, let's try the composition AI. So artificial intelligence inside Luminar attempts to make crops. And what I find is that it usually does a really good job of the amount. And then I just want to move it around a little bit. So in this case, right, I would just move it so that there's more of this log and less of the sky. And let's try Linton saying if we go even farther, or we could actually go freeform. I think you're thinking more like this, right? So if we do something like that, we end up with an odd shape, which is fine. Okay, there's no rules. But now you definitely are focusing more in on that stump. Okay, so yes, by cropping out, because this tree on the right here has what's called visual mass. Okay, so if I undo this for a second, okay, this tree on the right here, because it's dark and it's fairly large, right? It's taking up, half of this quadrant of the thirds, okay? It takes up what's called visual mass, and your eye is drawn to that thing because it's large and heavy. It feels heavy, right? So by cropping, and let's go back to freeform. By cropping some of it out and some of the sky out, we've definitely given the viewer more of an indication. I'm just going to get myself off the screen here. That what we want them to look at is in the foreground, is these logs, right? Now we can do things like if we want to change the sky or add some sky. But I think what I want to do is go more dramatic. So let's try the dramatic filter, right? I like to keep the saturation a bit more. It tends to turn the saturation down. And I like to lower the local contrast. So see, that's giving me a nice sort of punch. I definitely want to keep it less bright. And I feel like the color is off. So we can play around in here with the color and shifting the color or the white balance, right? Or we could just go and look at the mood, okay? If you're looking, Linton was asking about the color grading in Lightroom. Okay, toning is similar inside of here. Okay, so toning is highlights or shadows. So that's like the split tone. Okay, but I'm going to go and choose one of these LUTs again. So I love these for color grading. The Anaheim one actually has a real sort of 70s feel. But we have to decide, okay, what do we want to do with this? Do we want to bring out the warmth of the wood? Do we want to enhance the color? Do we want it to feel cool? Do we want it to feel like it's a faded old picture? Okay, and sometimes you don't know, like because it's not my picture, I didn't have an intention here. So I'm literally just sort of scrolling to get ideas. So Manhattan is not bad. It brings out the reds. Okay. Sepia gives sort of more of a almost black and white look. Smoky's nice, as is that one. Okay, let's go with smoky because it's bringing out the wood. Okay, so let's see what that's doing. So it's minimizing the blues in the background, and it's bringing out the color in the wood. Okay. Now we definitely want to use some structure on this because we want to bring out some texture. So again, go to extremes and then bring it back. Okay, so extreme plus structure is like clarity, similar to clarity versus almost blurry. Okay, so I want to do a fair bit of structure. And we're going to mask this one using the gradient mask. And I want to put it like so. Okay, so now I've drawn it up from the bottom so it applies where the red is. And if you don't see that, just use the / key. So it's applying on the foreground, not on the mountains. Okay. Now I'm going to copy this guy. So I'm copying the mask. And we're going to do the same with details. Okay, so again, we're going to do medium details. So look at the difference. Medium, go all the way to the right. Okay, versus small. Small, look what happens when I zoom in here. Like literally, it's like you can see the gnarled bits of the wood. Okay, see that? And large. Okay, so I'm going to do a slight combination of a little bit of medium details. I like about 30 to 40. I'm going to sharpen it. And now notice the background. Okay, watch what happens when I paste in this mask. Okay, it's going to take it away from the mountains in the background. Okay, so now it's only, again, applying to the foreground. Okay, like so. So now we've really sort of punched it up, got lots of nice contrast. Okay. One other thing I might do is a little bit of dodging and burning on this one. Okay. Or I could try the super contrast. Okay, so super contrast I mentioned earlier for toning down highlights. Ooh, that actually does a really nice job. Look at that. I might even just leave it like that. That did a really good job. Look at that. Brought the highlights down on everything. That looks really good. Okay, what I might do is just mask it to erase it a little bit from this log. Because remember, we wanted our eye to go more in here, right? So by masking it off, it's going to keep that highlight a little brighter. Okay? So see what this is doing. It's also darkening the sky, which is great. Okay? So I'm going to just dial that back. Let's see what happens with midtones. Oh, I'm happy with that. Okay, so see how I didn't have to do any dodging and burning or masking. I just used the super contrast. So how are we doing? We've picked up a lot of the texture. We've flipped the image. The sky is minimized. The tree is minimized. If I want to do a little bit of dodging and burning just to show you how it works, I can go into that tool. So this is an old term from the days of the darkroom, right? So dodging and burning in the darkroom literally was done with a board and a stick with a little thing on the end to either add or subtract more light when you're working in the darkroom, right? So they still use the same term. So lightening is dodging, okay? And they've made it clear inside Luminar, so it doesn't say dodge or burn. It says lighten or darken, okay? In this case, I want to darken some of these little things on the corners, right? And I always lower the strength to about 10 or 11, no more. Okay, so always when you're painting with the dodge and burn tool, make sure that you lower it, okay? Now they did add a softness slider on here, which is great. So now I'm just going to paint in, so I'm burning or darkening on some of these ones that are bright on the edges, right? Like these guys here. And you'll see it takes a second to apply. So what I do is I'll usually paint and then let it catch up. Okay, so let's turn it off. Okay, so see what it's doing? Take a minute to catch up again. So off, on. Okay, so I can keep going, and you just want to like do it bit by bit, okay, and layer it. I could use a smaller brush and get really in there. And then just apply it. Well, that's interesting. I don't know why it's doing that. Interesting. Hopefully that's not there. Right? If you make a mistake or something weird happens like this, you can go back in the history. I don't think that's actually there. I think my screen is playing tricks on me. There we go. Hopefully. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that and bring that back to Lightroom. All right. Glad you like that, Kevin. Question for you in particular, because you said you're using Luminar AI. Have you looked at or considered the new Luminar Neo that has been announced but not available yet. So I'm curious if you're considering that and if you have any questions about that, because I would love to know. If you were not here earlier, I mentioned that I'm going to be making an overview video of Luminar Neo. I don't have my hands on it yet, but I'm going to make a video just talking about the things that I do know about it and who I think it's going to be for and who should get it and who should not get it. So I'd love to hear if you have any questions on that, Kevin. Rob, maybe pop in our contact form in the chat just in case we lose Kevin in the chat. He can fill in the contact form and it'll send me an email. Okay, how are we doing? Well, we're at 90 minutes. And I think we did pretty well today in terms of editing. There's only 2 other images from this camera club that I'd like to finish up for them. This one from Bill. And I'm going to go a little faster and use the same steps. So I'm going to change the camera profile. And I'm going to check. I'm just moving the highlights down. But this one seems a little yellow to me. So I'm going to play with the color a little bit. And do my blacks and the whites. Okay, now notice the sky is clipping here. Okay, so I could choose to bring the highlights down, but when I do that, it's bringing the highlights down on everything. So I'm actually going to leave it and let the sky blow out. Okay, because then it sort of almost blurs those details out in that background. And I could go, like I said, one of 2 ways. But I want to bring, this is a really interesting looking, I don't know if it's a sculpture or something that somebody has made in the woods, and I want to have us pay attention to this guy and not the background. Okay, so once again, I'm going to use a radial filter. I'm going to lighten him, and then I'm going to duplicate it and invert it, and we're going to darken it like so. Right? So I might change my mind and bring those highlights down after all. Okay, so I try both ways. Let's take the highlights down like that. And we'll bring him a little bit more. Actually, I'm going to do a second or a third radial filter just on his little face. Right? And maybe even down on his paws here. Like so. So I'm using all of those tools, the masking, to just bring him out more, right? And when doing so, like I'm using the dodge face preset. So again, dodge is lighten, okay, or lighten face. But once you have them, you can go back and apply any of these guys again. And I'm going to add some texture and clarity, right? So I'm really going to pick up the texture in this wooden guy. It's a really interesting some interesting subjects this week, that's for sure. Right? And then just add an edge vignette overall, something like that. Okay, so this one is all about tone control for me, right? So he's a dark subject on a white background, right? So we could try and minimize that. I could attempt a sky replacement in Skyline, but I don't know if it's going to really recognize that as a sky or not. Yeah. Let's see. Awesome. Good choice, Kevin. I would say that if you're using Luminar now, you will probably enjoy Neo. Yeah, good job. This is a really interesting subject, isn't it? It makes me want to know, where he photographed this, because it's definitely, something that somebody has put there in this woods. I'm going to assume it's a park or a natural reserve or something where somebody has done this carving. Yeah, it's really interesting. I want to see it closer up. It looks like pieces of driftwood that have been put together to form this interesting little sculpture. Yeah, for sure. And there's eyes even. Yeah, very cool. This one might actually make an interesting black and white. See, now when I change to black and white, you'll notice that he's sort of gone. He's disappeared. But when we go down to the black and white mix, I know that he's got a lot of orange. So I'm going to increase that and the yellow. And let's see about darkening the green. So that helps. Right? I think I liked it in color better. Maybe just a little yellow. Right? So that's Bill's image. And the last one was from Ricarda. She's got this really interesting sort of shot of a pond. And I'm not the thing with this image is that it confuses me a little bit because I'm not really sure what to look at. So I want to look at this little plant here. So let's work on based on that and minimizing the outside parts. Okay, so we'll use a radial filter to lighten. I'm actually going to invert. Okay, so we're really working on sort of enhancing this part of the image here. Okay. If you had used a polarizing filter, that would have helped to get rid of some of the reflections as well, and you would have seen more into the water. So when you're shooting things like this, watch these reflections because the white sky or overcast sky, which looks like, is really taking attention. Okay, so if we want to focus in on this little plant, you really want to make sure that the reflections are minimized as much as possible. Okay. So it's better, but we still got a lot of distractions going on the outside. Okay, so as well as darkening, I'm going to lower the texture and the clarity and the contrast and the sharpness. Okay, so we're going to try and bring all of these things down. If I bring the shadows up, okay, now you can start to see into the water. See that? If I bring the shadows up and the exposure down, that will help reduce the contrast as well. So now we're sort of getting somewhere. You can see that it's minimizing the outer bits. And I might just reshape this graduated filter to have less of that. There we go. And maybe this little plant down here. Okay, so this is an image that is actually really hard to edit. You would have to do a lot of work to sort of minimize these shadows and bring attention to the plant. So this one is more of a, you want to pay attention to things like this when you're shooting it. We did have some issues with that earlier, Kevin. That's what Nancy and Rob were talking about. Try it again now. We'll have, I've got, if you purchased it, we've got your email. Just fire an email back from your receipt. And if you can't get it, but try it again now or refresh and see if it works now, because we were having a problem with it. As Rob says, it should be working now. So give it another try. And once you get it downloaded, Kevin, I would love to hear what you think. I would love to hear. See, I'm out of focus again. I'm just going to stay over here. Says I'm out of focus today. So I would like to know what you think of the bokeh once you get it downloaded. And if you are using Luminar, you are going to put that into the texture tool. So you're going to go to the extras and add it as a texture overlay. Then you can play with the blend modes and mask it just like you would a texture overlay, right? Also look for coming soon. If you are using Luminar, I will actually have some bokeh templates available as well, using some of those same bokehs, right? So I'm going to stop there for today. That's the wrong one. And there's our logo. So I'm going to stop there for today. I thank you all for coming, and thank you for always putting up with the technical issues and things. My computer's back up and running. Next week, we're going to have images from Charlotte Camera Club. So if you want to tune in, I'll be working on their images, but there's always lots to learn. And watch for my Luminar Neo video later this week, coming soon. And again, reminder just to check out our fall sale. We've got pretty much all of our things on sale this week until the end of next week, to the end of November 21st. Our courses, Lightroom, our learning, our portrait fundamentals course, and our 4 weeks course, which is for beginners. These are the master classes with Pete that we've done previously. There's also the one coming up. And then the bokeh packs, the best one being the ultimate pack. You get 50 bokehs and our sky, texture, and Lightroom presets. So check all those out, and we will see you next week, same time. Thanks, everyone.